just give you some highlights of our database. Right now, we have about 2.6 million contacts that are about a 50-50 ratio of male to female in our system. We treat everybody as individuals in our system. We have 1.2 million email addresses, of which 900,000 have opted in. We have 600,000 mobile numbers that we use towards our mobile text to give campaigns. Occupations, we now have 700,000, and that's very important to us as we build our lawyers for Israel, doctors for Israel, rabbis for Israel, and so on. Those occupations help us narrow in on those groups individually. Altogether, we have 1 million donors in our system. In a 4-year period, we have about 264,000 that are active and about 100,000 in each year. 11,000 have given a lifetime of 10,000 or more, and 20,000 of 5,000 or more. So that's a quick database snapshot, but it is constantly growing through your efforts out there and our marketing efforts, and we increase our database every day. And we use that data to set our goals, which is what we're going to talk about today, our budgets, but also to measure our performance. We mine the database to go through who we should be inviting to different events, for some of our planned giving materials, for some of our societies, as we mentioned, some of those rabbis for Israel, doctors Israel, and so on. And we try to be as strategic as possible with our database. And of course, we have tools in there to help our fundraisers with our stewardship and cultivation, keeping in contact with our donors and working together within our system. So when we talk about our data, we're fortunate at JNF to have so many donors, and we have a team of about 70 to 80 fundraisers, and we need to make sure that we engage those donors who want to take on a greater role, whether that's financially or such as yourselves, in your time and effort and being more involved. But we have to build our campaign all the time. And so we might start with a whole group of prospects that we then market to. We send out our direct mail. We send out our e-blast. We send out our text giving. And based on that, some will respond and make a gift. And of those that respond, based on what territories they're in and how much they give, we then assign them to fundraisers to build a relationship and to engage. Another way that we bring in, so these are sort of our pipelines, if you will. Another way is if we're honoring somebody at an event and we get a new list, then we invite them to attend the event. We speak about JNF and our work. And of those in attendance, a portion will make a gift, and then we notify the fundraisers in those areas as qualified leads. So those are some of the funnels or pipelines that we have within our system as one or two examples. And we engage them in different ways. So we might engage them on a ratio of 1 to 1 million, meaning that if we're sending out our B'Yachad newsletter to 1 million homes, or we're sending out a direct mail for Rosh Hashanah to 500,000 people, we're engaging 1 to 1 million, one messenger to that many, to a population or an audience that size. Based on people's interest, responsiveness, they will be invited to come to an event. And when we bring them to an event, we're engaging them on average of 1 to 500. We might have a speaker speaking about what we do at JNF, educating those who are in attendance, and we're engaging them on a ratio of maybe 1 to 500. And of those, there'll be people who do want to become more engaged with the organization, and a fundraiser will reach out to them and work with them on a one-to-one basis. And we hope that we're always moving in this direction, that we're always building our database, sending out information about JNF, in turn bringing them to our events or our conference this year, and then eventually in bringing them into the portfolios of our fundraisers in those areas to engage with them further. So that's the overall, movement and direction of our database. So now that you have that background of our database, I could explain a little bit about our budget process. There are typically two methods to creating a budget. There is the top-down approach and what's called zero-based, which is from bottom up. At JNF, we actually do both. We start with a top-down approach, figuring that based on prior year in total, taking into years of COVID, non-years of COVID. We're looking at our numbers and being very, very conservative because all our expenses are based on that. And we might have a goal on paper to start us off of 100 million. The 100 million is combined with our investments. So if we have endowments and other restricted funds, we may get a certain amount of income from those funds that could be directed towards our work in Israel. On top of that, we have national endeavors. We have bequests that could be anywhere from $7 to $10 million a year, making up about 10% of our campaign. We have product sales, people purchasing certificates. We could bring in between 4 and 5 million nationwide. And our direct mails for Rosh Hashanah, for Passover, for year end, and so on. And we could bring in an additional $3 to $4 million that way. So overall, again, this is on paper just to give us a general sense and vision of where we want to go. So if we know that 13 million comes in from national efforts and 7 million from our investment efforts, that's 20 million of the 100, leaving 80 million to be raised throughout our regions around the country. And so that's an overall goal, but then we stop and we pause and we flip it around. We then do an analysis, and this is just a draft, not to start taking down numbers here, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what we do. We then go through each region and look at what we're estimating the current year to close at. So we get an idea of where we are today, where we're going to be by September 30th of this year. The next step is to look and see if there are extraordinary gifts in those numbers that we're not expecting to repeat next year. So you can see I'm pointing to Los Angeles, for example, that we know have 1 or 2 very large gifts that might not be repeating next year, and therefore we can't budget on top of those. We have to remove those and then create a goal that is based on our annual campaign, not extraordinary gifts. And we come up with the goal that they would try to achieve. What is the national goal for that component, and therefore the total for that region. And this is only a starting point. Our national campaign directors are then brought into the conversation. It's discussed with the regional directors around the country. We want to make sure that we find a balance between being conservative, but being realistic, but also always striving to grow, always striving to reach. But there are so many factors that go into this. I'm not doing it any justice just by showing this one slide, because we take in our staffing into account. Did we employ new staff there? Have we increased our staff? Did we just replace somebody who was not there and it's a first year, so we have to lower the bar a little bit till they get to know the territory? There's a lot of thought that goes into this. But once this is done and everybody in the regions, all the regional directors and national campaign managers are involved and sign off on these numbers, we can then circle back and give those numbers out to each fundraising team. And then they divide it amongst their team. So if, for instance, LA has a goal of 7.5 million, they then sit around the table with their local team and figure out what everybody is capable of, how much they could stretch and reach and so on. And together, each fundraiser now creates their own budget. So overall, what we're saying is that everybody has a piece of the pie. So if every fundraiser has a goal and they reach that goal, and national does its part and reaches its goal, then together JNF will reach our 100 million. So we build upwards from there. So that's like an overall snapshot. From a fundraiser, for an individual fundraiser, we like to give them really easy tools for them to create their own budget. And a budget is really just another way of saying a plan, a goal. Nobody has a crystal ball. Nothing's, it's not a science. It's a little bit more of an art. But it's a goal and it's a plan that you could follow throughout the year, but there's always adjustments to those goals, course correcting along the way. So we need to make sure that we give the fundraisers the tools to monitor that and adjust accordingly. So the first thing the fundraisers do is if each fundraiser has an individual goal, they start with their inventory. They go through their donors who they're currently managing. and look at their giving from year to year and determine, is this person going to remain the same from communications with the person? Are they looking to increase their giving? Or perhaps, it's not a good year. They might even have to decrease something, or they might be on a multi-year pledge, so they're paying that off first. So each person is really thought and considered. And then we create what we call a rating, which is just a goal on an individual donor by donor basis. And we then look at those goals and we see how many we have at each level, and we start to build a plan. We know that we're going to have many more at the $1,000 level than we will at the $100,000 level, but our campaign is predicated on those larger gifts as well, and they're very, very important to us. And we also want to move people along to different levels as they get more involved with the organization. So when we really look at it at the end of the day, we're asking a fundraiser not to start from scratch. What we're saying is, if you go in, and we have step-by-steps in the system for them to do this, there's no math involved. They rate each donor, and then the next screen rolls up and totals for them, saying, okay, based on your ratings, you have 2 that are at the over $100,000 level, you have 2 at the $50,000 level, and so on. That's what you have today. So if this particular fundraiser had a goal of raising $2 million and had to create a plan for next year, they're not starting at 0, which is very overwhelming. They're starting at 1.7 million, and now I just have to figure out, how am I getting the additional $300,000? Am I doing that at the upper levels? Am I doing that in the lower levels? Am I doing a bit of a blend of both? And who do I have in my inventory that I think is capable of rising to that level? So this, again, it's very easy in terms of the numbers and plotting them in, but there's a lot of thinking that goes involved and reviewing of donors and seeing what we could count on for next year. So the goal is then to figure out how much of that extra 300,000 I need to put in for my goals. So I might say I have 2 right now, but I'm going to look for 3 in total at next year. I have 74 in the $1,000 level. I'm going to try to get to 84 or 94. It doesn't, necessarily mean it has to happen that way. If we ended up getting a $50,000 gift instead of 225s, nobody's crying about that. That's a wonderful thing. But it's a plan and it's a goal, and it's a way to measure throughout the year, how are we doing? The reason why I went through all of that is because each of you should be seeing our campaign progress report at your meetings. And the campaign progress report is structured the same way that pyramid, or that I showed you earlier, where it starts at the bottom. When we talked about engaging 1 to 1 million, that we do it nationally, everything under this subtotal line is happening nationally. Our direct mails, our product sales. Bequests, we put nationally, not because they are raised nationally, but as you all know, we can't determine when the next bequest is coming and from where, so we budget it on a national level. But all of this is in our national goal line item. Once we go above the subtotal line, we then have events. And that comes from the region. So that's the 1 to 500, if you remember that slide. The 1 to 500 engagement happens at events. And then when a fundraiser becomes a manager of that account, then they fall into these levels here. So let me say it a different way. Everybody you see in this bracket here, every one of these donors has a fundraiser that is engaged with them at JNF. Every one of them. Then we have events that we are engaging with our fundraisers, but we're doing it on an audience level. Of course, the larger donors at those events are taken over into these portfolios. So therefore, this line is not showing you total dollars raised from events. It's showing you the number of donors that are engaged through events versus through a one-to-one relationship with our fundraisers. We do have other reports to see the total impact of the event. The event might have raised $1 million, but it may have had a lot of major donors there that are being managed. And this is what is not being managed, if you will, those that are managed through an event engagement. So those are our three levels. We have individual one-to-one engagement, then we have engagement as an audience at an event, and then we have our national engagement through our emails, through our direct mails, through our mobile campaigns, and our stores for our trees and products. So that's overall, how it looks. From a fundraiser standpoint, it really works well that they could come in here, they could click at any moment in time, they could click on their budget and see this is what you started off the year, this is what you've budgeted, and here's how you are doing to date in real time. And so they could see which areas they're over or under, and they're able to course correct throughout the year. So again, going back to the campaign progress report, all of this section is the upper section for the campaign report. Then we have the events. This is the middle campaign section. And then there's the national, which isn't reflected here because this is just for one individual fundraiser. So everything sort of rolls up together. We do have another campaign progress report that's by giving level, where now it doesn't matter whether it's national or local. Tell me at the end of the day how many major donors we have at every level and so on. So that's just another way to look at it. And we also have a similar one where we could break it down for women's campaign, how that's doing in different giving levels around the country. So that's just a sample of different reports that we have. But the main report, which is our campaign progress report, I hope it explains a little bit better now to you where it all comes from. It all starts with our budgets, which all roll up to these two columns right here, number of units and dollars for our fundraising campaign. So here's that 80 million we spoke about, plus the additional investment income that's not reflected on here that ends up taking us to 90 or 100 million, depending on the year. So with that, I'll stop, but that's sort of our entire process on one leg. But it is more involved, of course. It takes us about 1 month, just for you to know timing. June is the month that our fundraisers work around the country with their teams to create their draft. Then July and August is reviewing and bringing up all those numbers in total and see where they end up. September, we typically bring them to the Budget and Finance Committee for approval. And then the first board meeting of the new year, we present it to the National Board for adoption and approval of the budget. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Ken.